right. Greetings. Good evening. Thank you all to everyone who was able to join us this evening for our educational webinar entitled Cheap, Flavored, and Dangerous: The Truth About Little Cigars, Cigarillos, and Blunt Wrappers. This webinar is being brought to you by the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council, also known as the AATCLC, the Uniting Communities for Equitable Health Policies Coalition, and the Decreasing Adolescent Tobacco Access Project. Tonight, we'll be speaking more about the health, equity, and social justice concerns surrounding little cigars, cigarillos, and blunt wrappers, the intersection with cannabis and other hemp-derived cannabinoids like Delta-8, as well as some practical policy-based solutions that can address these issues. My name is Nicole Turkson, and I am the project coordinator with the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council. And before we move on with our presentations, I'd like to review a few housekeeping items. First, in a few minutes, we'll be sharing the agenda in the chat, which contains a link to a Google Drive folder where you can find more resources on these topics, as well as a document containing our full presenter bios. And additionally, the chat feature has been enabled for you to communicate with the host and the panelists. However, we encourage you to use the Q&A feature to ask questions you may have for our presenters throughout the program. So without further ado, I will pass it over to Carol Magruder, our first presenter. Carol is a seasoned veteran of California's tobacco control experience and a founding member and co-chairperson of the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council. She created, in partnership with other co-founders, the AATCLC to inform the direction of tobacco control policy, practices, and priorities. And we work at the intersection of public health, policy, and social injustice. Over to you, Carol.
All right, good evening. Can you hear me? And can you see my screen? Those are the two questions.
We can hear you and see your
screen.
Can you hear me? For the most part, yes.
Okay, hopefully it'll straighten out a little bit. So good evening. I want to thank you all for joining us. We are venturing into new territory tonight, and we are very excited about getting our work underway to get little cigars, cigarillos, and these blunt wrappers regulated and off the market, along with the mentholated tobacco products. So we are, as Nicole said, the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council. I'm also the project director of 2 different statewide projects, amongst other things. And the people you see before bound ourselves together to work together in 2008. Most of us have been working prior to that. And we are busy working to save the 45,000 lives that are lost every year, Black folks in this country, to tobacco. So our work has really been focused on menthol and the little cigars and cigarillos. We would talk about it, but we haven't put some real concrete attention to it like we are going to be doing from this night forward. So when President Barack Obama signed the Family Smoking and Prevention, the Tobacco Control, all the flavors except for menthol. Menthol was left in, and African Americans by large smoke mentholated tobacco products because of the predatory targeting of the tobacco industry. At this time, we took great umbrage to that and began working because it was generally accepted that flavors hook children. This is before e-cigarettes and all the flavors, but people knew that that was the intro for most people was flavors. But who would protect Black children? Because Black children are not born whole adults smoking Newport cigarettes. We go through adolescence and like everybody else. And so these are the children who are just left out in the cold. Our babies exposed to secondhand smoke, our young adolescents with their brains forming like others when they're hooked young. The brain is much more susceptible to addiction. And so these were things that everyone knew, and yet these products were left on the market, and we've been fighting about that ever since. So this is an abstract that I show that just documents the pernicious targeting by all of the major tobacco companies giving away free cigarettes to Black children in every major city in this country, hooking them on the products. And we're living the legacy of that predation still in 2021 and 2022. So menthol is a human rights and social justice issue for us, and we consider ourselves to be the giant slayers because we are our little David fighting Goliath, working to bring down this beast. They're in action. They were given a mandate in 2009 and nothing has happened. And so the lawsuit which is an administrative lawsuit to compel them to act, is about the menthol. And our plaintiffs on that lawsuit is us, the Action on Smoking and Health, the American Medical Association, so our nation's doctors, and the National Medical Association, which is our nation's Black doctors, are all co-plaintiffs with us. And that generated some action on the part of the FDA in that they said they are going to start the rulemaking process next year. So what, we know what they say and what they do are two different things, but they did announce, and they actually were responding to not our lawsuit, but to a citizen's petition that had been filed previously. And they were trying to get our lawsuit dismissed, which it is still in place and still very active. So when this announcement was made in April 29th, efforts to ban menthol cigarettes. So that was the news. That was the headline. That was what everybody was talking about. I did so many interviews about this because it was a heroic day, even though it was just what they said they're going to do. But what didn't get as much attention and didn't get as much notice was that they also said they were going to ban flavored cigars, because flavored cigars, little cigars and cigarillos, which are very little different. There's no real difference between them and cigarettes, except the wrapper might be brown. They just were left out there, and it was the wild, wild west. So there was utterly no regulation on them at all. And at the time, we could not understand why they didn't simply bring those under the purview of the FDA with all the other products at the same time. So here we are in 2021, and now they're just beginning to act. And so there was no scientific reason why these products were not taken in under the FDA's purview, why they were not banned, why the flavors weren't banned, even if they were going to leave menthol little cigars, if there was any kind of logic to what they were doing. And as I looked at this, I just got even madder because, our focus has been so much on menthol, and there's just this whole subculture of African Americans and Latinos who are using these products. And it's just under the radar. So right now I'm going to share with you just some images that we've collected. And these are the people who are just totally not thought of at all in terms of needing any type of protection by their governments when we get these products taken off the market, which we absolutely intend to do. So these are some of the photos. And as we look at them, you can see that this is product placement. So when we think about e-cigarettes and influencers and placement, nobody just happens to be sitting in a flashy red car with the brand. So where you can see it with a nice young girl with a nice short skirt on. So obviously this is an advertisement, and we got these images from many places. But when you see these pictures, there's nothing in the picture that's there by accident, even though it might look like it's a picture that was just taken on the fly as a selfie or something. These are obviously staged advertisements for these products. And this reminds me of Newport ads with the having a good time with couples, and then notice the placement of the product in the young woman's hand. There they are again, having a great time. And this one was interesting. God is dope, as he's smoking his little cigars. The macho businessman, he's made it. And women have to keep up as well with the cigars and what men are doing.
Carol,
Then
I'll
the
just let you
flavors.
know. Carol, I'll just let you know some of the photos are not fully showing for us, I think, because of the internet delay. So if
Mhm.
we can get this slideshow and share it with our attendees afterwards, that would be fantastic.
Sure, we definitely will.
Thank
Do you
you.
think if I stay on the image a little bit longer, or should I just speed it up?
Perhaps we can see maybe like half of them. So if you want to slow
Okay.
down just a touch, that might help us see a few more.
So this is a picture of a blunt wrap. And so we were, as African American tobacco control advocates, we were trying to get some kind of action on blunts from when they first started, which I think it's maybe 15 years ago, just anecdotally. And of course, at that time, marijuana, cannabis was illegal. And so there was just a shutdown and a refusal by any public entity of research to address this issue. So we were just seeing the proliferation of blunts, which is how they took these little cigars, they meaning our young people, and would gut them and put marijuana inside and smoke it. And so we were seeing our children becoming addicted to nicotine through the back door of using blunts. And then the way that you use a blunt, which is not the way that you normally smoke a cigarette, is that you hold the smoke in your lungs as long as you can, because that's how you get high from it. So the intersection of the cannabis, of the marijuana, of the weed, whatever you want to call it, and the tobacco in these blunts, we saw just an inundation in our community with no assistance from any kind of health department, county health departments, because of that illegality of the marijuana. And when the FDA first had to gain control over the industry, or were brought in, the industry was brought in. At some of those meetings, the last meeting I went to where they were announcing their research priorities, and I asked, what about blunts? And the woman who was announcing the research priorities, and that was the formation of TCORS, the Tobacco Centers of Regulatory Science, she asked me what was a blunt. And so I knew that I didn't need to go back there, because I knew that the needs of my community and my young people were not going to be addressed if the people who were setting the research agenda didn't even know that these products existed. And so here we are now, 15 years in, 20 years in, with all these addicted young people who are now adults, really, and who are going to be mad when we take these products off. So that initial gutting of the little cigars turned into blunt wrappers, which would just come with the wrapper that you could put the marijuana and the cannabis in and then roll it. And that's still, so this is all an intersection of this. And I think some of the other presenters are going to be addressing this issue. I'm almost at the end of these slides, and we will furnish them to everyone along with the PowerPoint. and I want to just talk a little bit about where these ads are placed. We got the e-cigarettes, their ads were placed to entice our high schoolers and young people. So they're influencers, they're people who are paid to make this look very beautiful and sexy and alluring, which it does. I don't know, I hope you can see it, because this is actually a very beautiful picture. And so, but what it's selling is death and addiction. And this is selling power, you know, that you're part of the club now. You've arrived. I'm just going to go through quickly, and then we'll make these available to you. Let me back up. I don't know if you can see this one. So this is hookah, and hookah got an exemption from our state Senate bill 793, and hookah is all over in the Black African American community now. And so we need to tighten that up. This is tobacco, it is secondhand smoke, and it violates so many of our laws that I don't know how it's allowed to be used and sold, but it's all over in Atlanta. It's in all the restaurants, it's at weddings, and it's just crazy. And so we have to educate people, but then our officials need to act, and they need to prohibit these products, because they are, you're burning coal and carbon monoxide inside. This is outside, but the majority of them are being used inside. That's a great picture there. Very powerful advertisement. So this is what we show in our photos together, and one of our project assistants, Ekwa Arma, was the one who gathered those photos. So that's a big difference in the presentations that public health gives and what's happening in the real world. And so now we are getting into the real world, and we're going to get in, and we're going to get in with both feet, and we're going to deal with this. So this was the example that we also used when Cigarillos and cigars were totally left outside of the purview of the FDA, which we could not understand. This is a study that shows how the irritation to the throat is so much higher with Swisher Sweets. This was a study in 2017, and I just threw that in there because the research is there. And so how these products are just out there totally unregulated is just beyond me. And it just makes me even angrier as I review everything in preparation for this meeting tonight. So this is from the Imperial Tobacco, who make backwoods, talking about the specialist brands. So the specialist brands appeal to specific consumer groups and are comprised of blue. So that's the e-cigarettes, Cool, Gitanes, Jade, Cohibas, Monte Cristo, Romeo and Julieta, Backwoods, which is very, very popular with African Americans, Scroll, Golden Virginia, and Drum. Our specialist brands continue to perform well, with particularly strong growth from Blue, Backwoods, Cool. And then it says that the net revenue grew by 20%. So that will show you the uptake, because that's a pretty big jump in your revenue and your profit, 20% in 1 year. So these are some of the Backwood articles that are for sale, that are walking advertisements for Backwoods. And it's amazing how people would love this product so much, or there might be giveaways that they want to wear and advertise for Backwoods. So I want to stress that, because I'm going to talk about the criminality issue, and I would imagine that it's going to be even harder and stronger, the rhetoric from the tobacco industry, because we're dealing with a younger subpopulation of African Americans who are using these products. But the proposed ban that we're looking for the FDA to enter the rulemaking process next year would be on menthol and cigarettes and all flavored cigars. And it's only to address the manufacturers, distributors, wholesalers, importers, and retailers. So this is not about individual enforcement or persecution by the police department. And we're working as an entity, as a people, to deal with our police reform in our country that we need. But we can't allow these products who are targeting and killing people to stay on the market while we deal with the other issues that we have. We have to deal with all of the issues at the same time or simultaneously. And I want to contrast what happened with the little cigars and cigarillos that African Americans and Latino youth were smoking, and what happened with PAVE. And PAVE, Parents Against Vaping, these are my sisters. I'm proudly on an advisory member for PAVE, but PAVE, they're founded in 2018. And in these 3 years, they have, Juul has been sued and is now having to start to pay. North Carolina settled, I think, for $40 million. Attorney generals have sued Juul because they went after white kids first. So they went after the advanced placement kids, the honor roll kids, the soccer kids. And these are those children's mothers. And they now have, but for us, when our kids are smoking products that are detrimental to them and they're going to kill them, the societal response was a shrug of the shoulders, basically. And these products have just been allowed to proliferate like wildfire. So we are now taking this on. We will be working until the FDA does something. We'll be working with cities and counties to enact their own legislation to protect our young people and to move forward to help to get our people off of these deadly products. I want to just talk before I close about how uses the real issues of killings to blunt public health policy. And so I imagine that once we really get into these little cigars, that it's going to be like nothing we've never seen before, because this is a profit base for them. And they also, just like they don't want to lose menthols, they don't want to use our young people and the access they have to them on these products. This is Eric Gardner, New York, Black Lives Matter, the catalyst, the spark for that, selling Lucy's supposedly. And this is a young boy, this is California now. So this boy, this is last year, he was buying a Swisher Sweet outside of a 7-Eleven, a buddy deal or something, and this officer assaulted him, a slight child. And then the industry uses that to say bans that we're trying to get implemented to protect our young people. So we need to be ready for that. We need to face head on the issues that we're facing around Black men and boys who are killed. This is Elijah McClain, who was in Aurora, who's just walking home from the store and was assaulted and killed by police department and paramedics. So we know the targeting is there. We Senate Bill 793 is a referendum that will be on the ballot in 2022. And so we're up for the fight, and we're up to now to really focus our attention on this issue. And we'll be talking about, Dr. Smiley is going to give you some data, and then we're going to be talking about what are the solutions of where we want to go from here. So thank you. And I'm going to close it out.
Thank you, Carol. That was a wonderful presentation. Despite the technical difficulties, those images were very powerful, and we will make a point to gather them and include them in our post-event follow-up email for folks to have and be able to use in their own work on this issue. I've also been getting some feedback that the agenda has not been sharing in the chat, and I apologize for that. I've tried several times to share it through the chat, and we're having some issues, but please don't worry, that will also be included in our follow-up email. You will be able to access all of these resources. So next, I would like to introduce our next presenter, Dr. Sabrina Smiley. Dr. Smiley is a 10-year track assistant professor of public health in the Division of Health Promotion and Behavioral Sciences at San Diego State University School of Public Health. Her tobacco-related health disparities research examines predictors of tobacco use with a specific emphasis on the role of tobacco marketing and tobacco control policy in both the promotion and prevention of tobacco use in vulnerable populations. For Dr. Smiley's full bio, please refer to that agenda once you are able to receive it in the follow-up email. Over to you, Dr. Smiley.
All right, perfect. Good evening, everyone, and thank you to the organizers again for inviting me. This is a great space to introduce this topic. Let me put it on. There we go. There we go. Thank you, Carol. This is really good. So I am going to talk about some data that was conducted at the USC T-Course that specifically looks at disparities in retail marketing for little cigars and cigarillos in LA County and also greater Los Angeles. So the word tobacco in my talk does refer to tobacco products that are commercially manufactured, distributed, and marketed. So I want to start here, and this also just piggybacks on Carol's talk. I want to start here because most tobacco use begins during adolescence. This is data from the 2019 National Youth Tobacco Survey, and it describes the prevalence of past 30-day tobacco use. So the National Youth Tobacco Survey, it's a cross-sectional survey, it's school-based, it's self-administered, and it's specifically for US middle and high school students. So the 2019 National Youth Tobacco Survey sampling frame consisted of all regular public and private schools with students enrolled in grades 6 through 12 in the 50 US states and also the District of Columbia. And what's really striking about the 2019 data is cigar products were the most commonly used tobacco products among high school students and surpassing cigarette use. So, you know, while we've done really well with declines in cigarette use, still disparities that exist, but we see now that cigar products are likely the first combustible product of choice for youth of all race and ethnicities. But if we look even closer, Black youth are far more likely to pick up a cigar product than their racial and ethnic counterparts. And there's data that's coming out in which cigar products are starting to be looked at, not collectively, but by grouping. They are not homogeneous products. And Carol had a great slide that showed the diversity of these products, and this slide does as well. So I just want to give a little bit more context on the different product types, because the different product types are also linked to who's using which product. And most youth and young adults are more likely to use cigarillos. So, you know, while the 2019 National Youth Tobacco Survey reported data for all cigar products, 3 types of cigars are primarily sold in the US, and that's the traditional cigars, so the large premium cigars, also called regular cigars. These are about at least 7 inches, and they contain 5 to 20 grams of tobacco. And then you have the cigarillos, which are smaller cigars. They're slightly bigger than a cigarette, but they contain about 3 grams of tobacco. And they're very cheap. I mean, these are machine-made, mass manufactured products that were really introduced after the 2009 Tobacco Control Act. And the sales increased dramatically after the 2009 Tobacco Control Act. There are also filtered little cigars, the 3rd type. And so same size and shape as cigarettes, but they maintain a filter and contain about 1 gram of tobacco. So in addition to the different sizes, you know, there's data coming out showing that youth users have different patterns of use for these different products. So for example, there's a study that looked at frequently endorsed reasons for cigarillo and filtered cigar use among youth include curiosity, appealing flavors. Most youth are using flavored cigar products, and that's huge. Flavors are huge. Um, there's also, social, so using them around their friends. Again, they're very cheap, so low cost is appealing. And also this belief that flavored cigar products are easier to use than non-flavored cigar products. And there's also some data that came out suggesting that youth perceive flavored cigar products to be less harmful than cigarettes, including menthol cigarettes. Other reasons, so some youth smoke cigarillos as blunts, and Carol talked about this as well, by removing the tobacco from its casing and replacing it with marijuana, and still using the cigarillos or filtered little cigars with some or none of the tobacco that originally came in these tobacco products. And then other reasons specifically for cigarillo and little filter cigars, which are primarily used by youth, are more frequently used in youth and are often inhaled deeply, which also reinforces Carol's talk and how this leads to uptake and risk for addiction to nicotine and also poor health outcomes. So if we link this to who's using these products, again, the face of a young adult or an adolescent is going to be a Black youth. So this is where our study comes in, and the retail environment is very important. So given the background information on these products, thinking about these products, so thinking about little cigars and cigarillos and tobacco use disparities, this study really asks the question, what is the role of retail marketing, specifically at the neighborhood and community level? And since we know at the population level, what racial and ethnic groups are more likely to use these products, well, what does this look like at the neighborhood level across different racial and ethnic groups? So why the retail environment? The retail environment, it still is, despite the introduction of social media and Instagram and different websites for various tobacco companies, that local neighborhood convenience store is still where the industry is spending most of their dollars. So it's still the dominant channel for tobacco industry marketing. And we're talking in the US, the industry is spending billions of dollars a year to market these products. And there's clear data showing that a youth is likely to visit their neighborhood convenience store at least 2 times a week. So we're talking about repeated exposure to these products. There's data stating that more youth and young adults recall seeing tobacco marketing in their neighborhood convenience store than any other channel, say Instagram or another social media site or even a website. They're more likely to see it in their neighborhood convenience store. So for these reasons, we conducted this study because monitoring the retail environment not only informs policy, but it's also a way to really talk about social determinants of health, structural determinants of health, and how this influences racial and ethnic disparities when using these products. So this is the paper. I believe it was shared. This was published in 2019. And so our target sample, well, the objective of the study, again, we looked across 4 racial and ethnic neighborhoods in LA County and the greater Los Angeles area. So neighborhoods that were majority African American, Latinx, Korean American, and also white. The target sample was 700 stores with licensed tobacco retailers. And the sampling design, which I'll go into a little bit more detail about. So stores were classified into one of 5 categories. The first category were small independent convenience stores, and they were with or without a gas station. The second type of store were neighborhood, your liquor stores, so beer, wine, and liquor stores. The third store type were small independent grocery stores that primarily sell food. We also looked at the fourth type were tobacco focused stores. And then the fifth type we called other store type, which were gas kiosks or donut shops. We excluded pharmacies, big chain supermarkets, and also vape shops. Selection of stores was performed in 2 steps. So in step 1, zip codes with a median or below median household income for Los Angeles County were rank ordered by percentage of race and ethnicity. In step 2, stores were randomly selected from ranked zip codes using a comprehensive list of approximately 11,600 licensed tobacco retailers. And this list is maintained by the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration. The number of stores selected was based in proportion to the race and ethnicity percentage of each zip code. So we ended up with about 56 zip codes that matched that criteria. Approximately 10,200 of the 11,600 licensed tobacco retailers were eligible under our store criteria. 2,556 of the eligible stores were in the 56 zip codes. So in total, the sampling represented about 22% of licensed tobacco retailers in LA County and the greater Los Angeles area. So our final store sample size was a total of 679 out of the targeted sample of 700. Data collection involved adapting the standardized tobacco assessment for retail settings, also known as the STARS store assessment tool. And we adapted this across 4 outcome measures that I'll go into the next slide. 19 community health workers did receive in-person training. This included a detailed protocol for recording exterior and interior store assessments of tobacco products and marketing materials. They also conducted supervised field practice before official data collection. The study was conducted between January 2016 to April 2017. So you can see, this was a cross-sectional study, observational, and just how large scale it was to collect data in close to 700 stores. And the community health workers did visit 700 stores in 56 zip codes and completed 679 store observations. Store owners, managers, or clerks were consented to permit the assessment, and those who did agree received a $50 gift card and fact sheets on FDA and specifically tobacco regulations. And the fact sheets were available in English, Spanish, and Korean. So these were the outcome measures of interest for this study related to little cigar and cigarillo retail marketing disparities. So we wanted to know about availability. On the STARS tool, a community health worker simply marked the presence or absence of whether LCCs, little cigars and cigarillos, were sold in that store. Were those LCCs flavored? Singles, which are very popular and are cheap, at least 99 cents or less, were singles available. We also were interested in advertising, exterior or storefront ads, and also interior advertisements. So, a question was on the STARS tool was, are LCC advertisements outside the store? And then inside the store, are they being advertised for less than $1? And that's going to hit on the single LCCs. Price promotions, this included, advertisement for 50 cents off, or buy 5 cigars, get 3 free, which is very appealing and keeps you coming back if you are a user, right? These price promotions. And then product placement, we were interested in youth exposure again. So, are these products within a foot of, say, toys and candy and other sweets, like a slushy machine? Or are they at child level, so at or below 3 feet? Okay, the fun stuff. So the results, overall, these little cigars and cigarillos were widespread. So convenience stores with or without a gas station were the most common store type, followed by small independent grocery stores and liquor stores. Little cigars and cigarillos were sold in 90% of stores in the total sample. Flavored cigars, including flavored cigars and singles, were also widespread. Nearly 80% of stores sold these products for less than $1. Less than 20% of stores in the total sample offered price promotions, and nearly 30% placed these products within a foot of toys and candy. So we wanted to look at disparities and, controlling for race and ethnicity at the neighborhood level. We really see it's striking data, because controlling for store type, stores in majority Black, Hispanic, and Korean American neighborhoods in Los Angeles and the greater Los Angeles area had significantly higher odds of selling little cigars and cigarillos, including flavored versions. And if you look at, the first column, stores in majority Black neighborhoods are 8 times more likely to sell these products than stores in majority white communities, 5 times more likely to sell flavored cigars, and 2 times more likely to sell singles. Looking again, controlling for store type and race ethnicity for zip code clusters. We asked the question, are storefront ads for little cigars and cigarillos, are they outside the store? And of all our groups, we see that stores in majority Black neighborhoods are significantly more likely to have storefront ads compared to stores in white neighborhoods, 6 times more likely, and 2 times, almost 3 times as likely to sell these products for less than $1. For price promotions, stores in Korean American neighborhoods were significantly less likely to have price promotions compared to stores in non-Hispanic white neighborhoods. But when we look at product placement, you see that only stores in majority Black neighborhoods were significantly more likely to have these products near toys or gum, candy, a slushy machine, 3 times more likely than stores in white neighborhoods. And going back to that child level view, interior ads, so 5 times more likely to have these products at a child's eye level compared to stores in non-Hispanic white neighborhoods. So, the takeaway and implications, I would love for this study to be reproduced. Our data was collected from 2016 to 2017. So it would be great to do it again. But the takeaway is these products are widespread in LA County, over 80% of stores selling them, including flavored versions. But what's really striking is that stores in majority Black neighborhoods are most likely to sell, advertise, and place these products within the reach of a of a very young child. So, in the paper, we do have a call for action on local, state, and federal flavor restrictions, minimum pack size standards, but also preventive messages and campaigns to counter the influence of little cigar and cigarillo marketing in retail establishments. And I want to end here. Sorry. Just want to end here because I think it's important, and this also ties in with Carol's talk. I think it's important to frame this within a health equity lens. I view disparities in the retail environment. It is an issue of health equity and social justice, but it also is housed within persistent and ongoing issues within the Black community. And it's a social and structural determinant of health that's linked to the history of redlining and the ongoing racism. And also the fact that in these same neighborhoods, there is more policing. And so I think, as these policies begin to come forward and we begin to educate community members, it's important to know that the industry is doing the same thing they did with menthol cigarettes, they're doing with cigar products, specifically these cigarillo brands, because they have they know their target audience, and it's Black, Latinx, it's young adults, youth of color. And I just wanted to show this slide because this is a paper that we have coming out soon, but right after the death of George Floyd, you had all of these cigarillo brands like Swisher Sweets and Backwoods and others, aligning themselves with Black Lives Matter. And so here we have the industry, which has racial, targeted our communities for years, but quickly aligning themselves with our community. And so this is the president of Swisher actually posting this on their Instagram. And this was less than a week after the death of George Floyd, talking about solidarity and how we've been quiet, but yet we're listening and we want to make this right. And nothing has come out of this except pushing more products. So I just think that we have to keep this in the conversation, in addition to the policy, and our messaging should counter what the industry is doing. So I want to acknowledge all of the community health workers and co-authors. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Smiley. Really appreciate you really overviewing that data for us. A lot of the work that we do needs to be supported by data in order for folks to really listen to what we have to say. So once again, thank you for that. And if folks in our audience have any questions for Dr. Smiley or for Carol, or for any of our presenters that are yet to come, please use the Q&A feature to drop those questions in. I see we have a couple so far. And once we get to the Q&A portion of our program, we will be sure to address those. So next, I'd like to introduce our next presenter, Brenda Villanueva. Brenda is going to be speaking a little bit more on the cannabis and hemp-derived cannabinoids piece. Brenda is the former co-chair of the Los Angeles Drug and Alcohol Policy Alliance and former chair of Rethinking Access to Marijuana, working to reduce the detrimental impacts of drugs in the lives of young people in Los Angeles County. Brenda was also one of the founding members of one of our co-sponsoring organizations tonight, Uniting Communities for Equitable Health Policies, also known as USEP, which seeks to address policy gaps and loopholes between the alcohol, tobacco, and cannabis industries. Over to you, Brenda.
Hi, once again, thank you for having me here. I'm very happy to be a part of this. I'm gonna take a minute to share my screen real quick. Can everyone see that?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. So today I will be talking about the intersection between cannabis and hemp-derived cannabinoids. As we have been seeing in the work that we've been doing, we have seen that one of the largest loopholes, if you will, as far as cannabis policy has been the siloing, if you will, or the trying to distinguish hemp from cannabis, or separating them instead of really regulating them as such. So I'll dive a little bit deeper in that. But just to get us started, some of the things that we'll discuss or I'll be sharing today is one, the similarities and differences between cannabis and hemp-derived cannabinoids. So this one I'll just kind of glance over real quick, just the chemical similarities in both and why they should both be regulated. Number two, we're gonna dive in really pretty much in the intersection of cannabis and hemp-derived cannabinoids when it comes to policy and regulation and the loopholes that actually entails. So we'll be talking about that a bit, and also where smoke shops now come into play. That will be the third objective on how we're seeing some of those sales coming about through smoke shops. So we'll discuss the role that they play in the illicit sales and also the hemp-derived or cannabinoid-derived products. So to start it off, just real quick, cannabis and hemp, some of those similarities and differences. Chemically, they look about the same, and they do both have 21 carbon atoms, 30 hydrogen atoms, and 2 oxygen atoms. The main difference lies in the way the atoms are arranged. So chemically, that's really the main difference, and also just the way chemically they are perceived in the brain. So CBD tends to kind of shut down the cannabinoid receptors to a degree where THC binds to them, and that's what really produces the psychoactive effect. Another thing to kind of note is oftentimes, and I think this is where a lot of the confusion sometimes lies, is in the sense that, they try to separate CBD and THC, and when that happens, oftentimes they don't realize that often these CBD products also contain a degree of THC. And really what differentiates or allows the hemp market to separate itself is that CBD products tend to have 0.3% or less THC. So that kind of, and that was pretty much brought about through the Farm Act. But basically, that's the main difference. So it's not to say that hemp products or CBD products do not contain THC. It's just that the main driving factor to separating them is that usually to be deemed a complete CBD product, it has to contain very minimal THC. Now, the reason this, and this is where we're going to jump into the loopholes, why this kind of segues the way for the illicit market is that it allows people that have not, or companies that have not attained the license, because it is costly and it is some work. It pretty much allows them to post as a CBD shop, because with the differentiation of the two, it pretty much allowed the hemp industry as a whole to pretty much be unregulated to a degree. So with that being said, it kind of opened the door for some of those that are in the cannabis industry to post as CBD shops and sell products that contain supposedly only CBD with actual higher concentrations of THC. So let's get into that intersection. Some of the things that we noticed when it comes to the policy and regulation loopholes that kind of really stood out to us was that with hemp-derived cannabinoids, they do not require lab testing. And obviously, when that happens, it poses a huge public health threat. On some of those lab tests, we were starting to see that not only did they sometimes contain higher doses of THC, but also sometimes they didn't have any CBD at all. So it was pretty much just different chemicals or just oils that had different food coloring or something. They weren't even CBD. Or three, it had high concentrations of pesticides because it wasn't being regulated to be tested, and it's not required. The second thing that we were starting to see is that stores and CBD shops can operate unregulated. We started to see an upburst in the CBD market. You could go to a local pharmacy, some regular stores would have CBD products. And again, that's where the smoke shops came in too, because CBD and hemp in essence is unregulated. They began to sell these products. But then again, per policy, as it should be, there should be a distinction between all of these industries. There should not be sales of alcohol where there is sales of marijuana or tobacco, and vice versa. They should not be intersecting. But because there is this loophole, that opened the door for industries to intersect and be integrated. So that's one of the things that we were starting to see. And then the third thing is that with CBD or hemp-derived cannabinoids, there is no minimum age restrictions, which again, technically speaking, no persons under 21 should really be visiting smoke shops, but because some of these products can be sold in other different kinds of storefronts, this has opened the door for access and availability of such products to youth, because there are no age requirements, and that also opens the door for cannabis products to be sold if they are posting under hemp or CBD shops. So one of the things that we were seeing in some of the lab testing requirements, this is where I was talking about the distinction between cannabis and hemp derived. When it came to cannabinoid testing with cannabis, it is required, but with hemp derived, it is not, or it is not defined. So that would be entailing verifying the amount of cannabinoids such as THC, CBD, and others. So there's not just, again, there's just the distinction between the two, but oftentimes in regulation, they're not looking at terpenes and other different kinds of cannabinoids that are within the products. So in the cannabis industry, they're held to actually test when they're licensed, but when they're obviously unlicensed shops do not test their products in the lab. But on the same token, CBD or the hemp industry as a whole is not really required to go through the lab testing. The second thing is that they're not being required to test for foreign materials. So that's the sand, soil, insect fragments, other stuff. So cannabis is, the hemp industry is not. There is no testing for heavy metals like calcium, lead, arsenic, mercury. And that's becomes more of a bigger threat with the vape products, because that's where we're seeing some of the uptick in some of these pesticides as well, and some of these extra chemicals, if you will, in products. And because they're not being required or submitted to testing, if you guys were aware, not so long ago, we had a big incidence of VAPI, which was the vapor-associated pulmonary illness. So that was a big surge on that, was because we were starting to see that a lot of those incidences were connected to products that were being sold in either the illicit market or within some of the hemp products as well. And it was also found in tobacco. But that was one of those things where, because it wasn't being tested, we had that issue. Also microbial impurities, that's not being checked. Mycotoxin testing, so that's like a different colorings and some of those carcinogens that some of these products tend to have, the pesticides, and then also the solvents, which depending on the product, I know some of the municipalities are a little more stringent as what solvents can be used to actually extract some of the THC in their products. Within the hemp industry, that's not really checked, but certain municipalities might not allow volatile solvents such as butane and such. So that's a thing that can become an issue. So that's one of the things that we were noticing. Sorry, I apologize. Another thing with the hemp derived and cannabis sales, we were noticing that it was kind of having an upsurge, not in the different kinds of products that were not only potentially THC filled per se, but they were also products that were starting to mimic those that are being sold in the cannabis industry. For example, a smoke shop in Torrance was selling hemp CBD flowers for $20 and hemp CBD joints for $4.99. But again, some of these, because they have no age limits, are accessible to use. And since they're not being tested, we do not know exactly what the consumer is consuming. We started seeing an uptick of CBD sales for hemp-derived cannabinoids in vitamin shops, GNCs, Walgreens, CVS's. So some, as you can see in the vitamin shop there, CBD is being advertised, and that was another vitamin shop in Torrance. So again, another big deal, or why we are, or the biggest thing, as Nicole said, I am part of Rethinking Access to Marijuana, and our greater focus is looking at access and availability of marijuana to use. And we were seeing a huge loophole within, access and availability to use, particularly right now during the pandemic when delivery sales surged. But also a lot of these came, or some of these third-party delivery services really came from those that post as CBD shops or post as wellness shops. So that's something that we saw that were, because there was no age requirement, it was easily accessible to use, particularly in the ones that either post as a CBD shop or smoke shops that were near schools. So hemp CBD products, again, have no minimum age restrictions, unlike tobacco, which actually has the restriction of 21. But again, it's a greater loophole. And one of the things that we're starting to see, even in the assessments that I'm about to discuss, is that a lot of the smoke shops aren't even really promoting tobacco products as much anymore. They're starting to promote the Delta 8s and some of those hemp-derived cannabinoids that have been synthetically converted from CBD. So that's something that's, obviously posing a concern for us as a group. And so this is what has led us, and this is probably where I'm going to spend the majority of the time. It has led us to the smoke shops, the intersection between tobacco and cannabis, with smoke shops and cannabis sales. Some of the things that we started kind of initially seeing with the Rethinking Access to Marijuana Smoke Shop Initiative, which actually was brought upon one of our partner agencies here in the San Fernando Valley. So that was brought upon because we started kind of seeing that there were sales of extraction kits, really. This really came about because we were starting to see that we hadn't heard of the products yet, to be quite honest, but we started seeing that they were selling extraction kits, they were selling butane tanks, and we were starting to see just an uptick in paraphernalia for marijuana. So we were seeing that more smoke shops, particularly some that were very close to schools, were selling CBD. Delta 8 is what came up on the radar, Delta 10, THC, paraphernalia, and other dangerous products that facilitate youth consumption. Because of this, we started to run an assessment and we decided to start documenting the extent of the problem. So we started to create a profile of shops, smoke shops that were close to the schools that all of our partnering agencies were serving. And we started noticing real quick that smoke shops really started becoming a driver for the illicit sales of marijuana, particularly with the loopholes with the synthetic converted cannabinoids. So there's a stage for oversight and policy in our conversations. Obviously, it's driven us to really start looking at how we're going to present this to our local jurisdictions to really look at policy. And obviously, we're trying to get a better understanding of the products and what's going on and the trends that are upsurging. But one of the things that we started seeing, and even with some of our partner agencies that started to work in the schools, was that students were actually starting to say that they were having access and that it was becoming very easy to purchase these products. So just to kind of give you a sense of some of the products that are being sold and the assessments that we ran, Delta 8 was a huge one, CBD products, THC products, counterfeit packaging. One of the ones that we started seeing a lot, and because this one sounded an alarm to us because it was really heavily advertising to youth with using a very familiar type of branding with the Mario Karts. So they were basically vaporizing cartridges, but with the logo of Nintendo's Mario. So those were some of the products that we were starting to see. We were seeing empty vaporizer and cartridges. So that meant that if you bought those, they were going to try to sell the extraction or the pretty much the concentrated CBD or hemp-derived synthetic cannabinoids. And obviously that pushes the sales to the extraction kits. So there's been a big push within the tobacco industry in itself, or at least through the smoke shops, to not only sell these products, but also facilitate the consumer's ability to extract or make as much as they can through these products. We started seeing an uptick of butane canisters and extraction kits in LA, in downtown LA, actually. I believe it was last year, we had an explosion in downtown because some of these butane cans went off. And so that also poses now, and with all of these products being sold, it's not only a public health issue, but now it's becoming a public safety issue as well, with the way that these products are being sold and packaged, and also the way they're being promoted and the way they're being handled even at the store in itself. Sometimes they're not stored properly, and that also opens the door to some of these safety hazards that we've been seeing. Another thing that we saw, and this was put forward by the FDA, some of the greater risks that we have been seeing with Delta 8. Number one is that Delta 8 THC products have not been evaluated or approved by the FDA for safe use and may be marketed in ways that put the public health at risk. Oftentimes, depending on some of the products, some will actually say that it may cause psychoactive effects, but some of them are actually advertised as just hemp or CBD extracted or just another form. But in the recent products that we've been purchasing, because we started doing the assessments ourselves as an agency, we started seeing that there was a huge promotion for, it was kind of, being promoted as a way to get high without getting caught. And, some of the shops that we went to, some of the managers would be like, instead of, we would scan the store in itself looking at tobacco products, but they were like, I don't think you want that. I think you might be interested in this. And so there's a bigger push to really sell these products out to the public. So it really becomes a concern because not only are they being, unregulated, but now there's like a greater push for promotion without very little research being done into how it's really beginning to affect people. Although there has started, which leads us to number two, there has been a couple of, adverse event reports involving Delta 8 and THC containing products, but there's still not substantial information in how these products, this cannabinoid in itself really affects the body. We know that it does have psychoactive effects, and it does have some of those same symptoms that T8 delta 9 THC may have, but the fact that it is synthetically converted from CBD, there's still more room to do more research to see how even that process in itself affects and impacts the body. Number 3 is that delta 8 THC has psychoactive and intoxicating effects, which we discussed. And that's why it's kind of like the hot thing in the market. We're starting to also see delta 10s, THCA, there's CBG, and a lot of these also have psychoactive effects. And so some of these products are like the high commodity because they're not being, basically because they're unregulated. There's not much, it's not really scheduled one yet. I think they're starting to look at policy to really ban these products. But so far, so forth, there's a couple of states that are able to sell these products because it hasn't really been addressed at the policy level. So because of this, we're starting to see an uptick in these sales and the heavy promotion of it. And it's being sold as a hot commodity, as a legal way to get high. So that's very concerning as far as how we look at public health and safety and how we're looking to advocate when it comes to, regulating. And this is why we actually came together and formed Uniting Communities for Equitable Health Policies, because we were starting to see that too often these different industries were being siloed and addressed separately, but there was no talk about how they intersect and impact our communities when they're being sold in the same place. Delta 8 THC products often involve use of potentially harmful chemicals to create concentrations of Delta 8 THC claimed in the marketplace. And so what we're starting to kind of see too is that there is an actual natural amount of Delta 8 in natural hemp, but the fact that it is being synthetically converted to have these psychoactive effects, I think is what's really concerning. And again, oftentimes to get that chemical procedure going on, it involves volatile solvents. So you're not just thinking about cannabinoids impacting the body, but also the chemicals that are being used to make this process impacting the body, which is some of those issues that we're seeing with the vape cartridges. Delta 8 THC products should be kept out of reach of children and pets, which is pretty much a no-brainer. But again, this is becoming very accessible to youth just because there's no age limits to regulating hemp products, and there's no real regulation on these stores. There's anybody could go into any CBD shop, any wellness store, and so that's another concern for us, that there's been such a deregulation of marijuana industry in itself. So now having, and I'm pretty sure they're going to address it with the impact and passing of SB 45, which now kind of allows hemp-derived products in food. That's going to be a whole other issue, and we're going to see a lot of loopholes come out of that as well. So all of these things are very concerning, and which takes me to the other part is, what can we expect and what can we do? So far, the DEA is trying to catch up with these trends and is looking at legislation to ban Delta 8, as it is synthetically converted from CBD. And I do believe that even through the Farm Act, any synthetic cannabinoids are to be banned. But I think with the big push from the hemp industry as a whole to say, oh, well, this is hemp and it's not THC, that's being one of those things that the industry is heavily pushing. But as we know, because it does pose those psychoactive effects, I'm believing that at the federal level and at the local level, we're going to start to see an upsurge in the way that policy is going to be looked at, and the way that local municipalities are going to look at this, as we're starting to see an uptick in not only use from common folk, but also the access and availability to minors. And one of the biggest things that we're looking at is really trying to address this issue at the local level, which is why we are doing the smoke shop initiative, which is why we are looking to assess these stores. And we're not only trying to assess the illicit market's role and the hemp industry's role in it, but really also the smoke shop's role and how it is really pushing forward not only the sales of these hemp derived cannabinoids, but also just the illicit market as a whole. So that's something that we're going to be looking at. And I know I kind of went fast, but I wanted to be mindful of time. So I know that we're going to have questions in the end, but this was put together pretty much by Youssef, Rethinking Access to Marijuana, and my agency. That's definitely where you can reach me at. But thank you for the time. And I'll turn it back on to Nicole.
Thank you, Brenda. I mean, every time I, have the opportunity to learn more about the cannabis and the hemp industry, I really learn a lot. Like Brenda said, we are in the USEP Coalition, Uniting Communities for Equitable Health Policy, so that we can break out of these silos that we find ourselves in, working exclusively on tobacco, exclusively on cannabis, exclusively on alcohol, because there's a clear intersection. I mean, even just from your presentation, learning the role of smoke shops in, facilitating access to cannabis products and hemp-derived products, while at the same time making available these cheap little cigars and cigarillos that people co-use all the time. And so we're, like you're saying, looking for practical local solutions for these problems that are in our communities. And so at this time, I'd like to just speak briefly about some of these proven strategies that can help to offset the impact of little cigars and other products, which we've learned are oftentimes much cheaper than other forms of tobacco, making them overly accessible to vulnerable groups and enabling that co-addiction to other substances like cannabis. So if we look at the infographic, we can see that there are three main point of sale tobacco pricing policies that help to reduce access to these products. And so our local jurisdictions can actually implement these to reduce the burden of tobacco in our communities. So if we look at the first panel on this infographic, and by the way, I'd like to thank Change Lab Solutions, as well as countertobacco.org for putting together this very helpful infographic that helps us increase our understanding on this topic. And this, as well as other resources, can be found in that Google Drive once folks are able to access it after this program. So first, we see that we can set a minimum price for all tobacco products. So we've seen the price of cigarettes increase dramatically over the years, but this hasn't been the case for other tobacco products. What we're seeing is that when prices for one type of tobacco increase, like with cigarettes, users of tobacco often switch to other less expensive tobacco products, which include these 2-for-1 Swisher Sweets, Cigarillos, the Backwoods, the Dutches, and all the rest of them. So by establishing a minimum price for all tobacco products, a policy can discourage people from substituting one tobacco product for another and go on to discourage that co-use of tobacco with cannabis when these products are less affordable. Looking at that second panel, we see another option is to pair minimum price policies with minimum pack size requirements. Although federal requirements make cigarettes or federal requirements cause cigarettes to be sold in packs of at least 20, the federal government and most state governments do not impose similar restrictions for little cigars and cigarillos. So again, these products can be purchased 2-for-1 or even less than $1, sometimes for pennies on the dollar. For these products, tying minimum prices to minimum package sizes can increase the policy's effectiveness. So for example, we see in this picture that these grape flavored cigarillos are being sold 10 for a pack. 10 in a pack. So imagine, instead of being able to get one cigarillo for 49 cents or two for 99 cents, if a person had to prepare to spend $10 in order to get their hands on these products, it would make it much less affordable. And that can really have an impact, especially for youth and other low-income communities that are very price sensitive. So what we'll see is that it would encourage them to decrease or end their use of these products. In the third panel, we see that another option is to prohibit the redemption of coupons, discounts, and promotions. And I think this one is pretty self-explanatory. We don't want to make it easier for people to get their hands on tobacco products by making it cheaper, especially since the tobacco industry uses discounts and coupons as part of their marketing strategy, especially when trying to initiate new customers. So if we look at all of these strategies at their fundamental level, we can see that they all work to increase the price of tobacco products. And research shows that raising the price of tobacco products is one of the most effective strategies for reducing initiation of tobacco use, decreasing tobacco consumption, and increasing cessation of tobacco use. So while jurisdictions consider these and other methods for decreasing the burden of tobacco in their communities, it's important to keep in mind that especially low-income individuals, youth, other marginalized communities, especially groups of color, they'll face additional barriers to quitting. And they may need additional support systems in order to quit, especially when these products are made less accessible to them. So communities implementing policies that increase the cost of these products should also increase the availability of appropriate cessation interventions that are culturally competent, and also make a concerted effort to outreach to these groups and make sure that they're aware that these programs are available. So I'll stop there, and we'll just let folks know that this is the beginning of this conversation, and we are planning future programs that will follow up on all of these topics that we've discussed today. And so I will go ahead and introduce our final speaker for this evening, Yanette Rodriguez. And Yanette Rodriguez is, she works with the University of Southern California, USC, under the leadership and guidance of Dr. Lourdes Baezconde Garbanati. Yanette is a regional coordinator with the Latino Coordinating Center for Tobacco-Free California, and which is funded by the California Tobacco Control Program. She's also a project manager on 2 research studies that examine secondhand smoke exposure in multi-unit housing, tenant and landlords' knowledge, beliefs, attitudes, and behavior, compliance, and support to smoke-free policies in Los Angeles County. And she has more than 15 years of experience in tobacco control and research. Over to you, Yanette.
Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us tonight. And I want to thank all of the presenters for the great information that we learned today in regards to cheap, little cigars and cigarillos, as well as the intersection of these products. As we know, we have seen hemp blunt wrappers, and even as Brenda talked about, CBD and cannabinoid derived from hemp products. So thank you so much for the presenters on presenting all this information with us. And we wanted to quickly talk about, we hope that these presentations actually inspired you to want to do something, because I know we shared a lot of information from LA County, but we know that this is not only happening in LA County. We know that this is happening broadly throughout California and other parts of the nation as well. So we wanted to quickly talk about some of the ways that you can stay informed of what is happening, and also be more involved in efforts to reduce the availability of little cigars and cigarillos and other harmful products, such as we discussed, such as Delta 8 and other products like that. We wanted to share that you can join the Little Cigars Task Force. If you're interested in becoming more involved in this effort to address the issues of little cigars, you're welcome to join this task force, which will be led by the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council. And we're going to go ahead and put a sign up sheet a sign up link in the chat. And you can sign up for the Little Cigars Task Force to be part of a growing body of concerned stakeholders who want to address the issues of cheap, flavored little cigars, cigarillos, and blunt wrappers in our communities. So again, we're going to be putting the information in the chat for you to sign up for this task force. And this is a broad task force and not just for LA County. If you're not in LA County, we welcome you to join this task force. We also wanted to encourage you to sign up and get involved in coalition work. We wanted to highlight two in particular in LA County. And the first is the Round Work Group, which Brenda mentioned, which is the Rethinking Access to Marijuana. And it's a diverse group of community-based organizations working together to educate people about the harms of youth marijuana use. And RAM is committed to helping LA County residents take action in their communities to minimize youth exposure to marijuana. They focus solely on youth marijuana use prevention. And their mission is to prevent access and availability that leads to the use of marijuana products by youth in Los Angeles County. And their vision is to see flourishing youth and communities free from marijuana-related harms. I also wanted to talk about Uniting Communities for Equitable Health Policies, the USEP Coalition. This is a coalition on the intersections of tobacco, cannabis, and alcohol policies in the greater Los Angeles County. USEP meets every month. They meet every third Friday of the month from 10 to 11:30. And the next meeting is going to be happening next week on December 17th. And at this next meeting, we actually will be having the Public Health Law Center come speak about how jurisdictions can actually regulate Delta-8 products. So we will also be putting in the chat information on how to access or contact RAM, as well as the Uniting Communities for Equitable Health Policies. And I also wanted to mention that although we're only highlighting these two, there are many other coalitions that you can join in LA County, but also beyond LA County and other parts of California. So we encourage you to look into these coalitions in your local jurisdictions. You also can sign up for several different various newsletters. Two that we wanted to highlight are the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council, which many of you have already, you heard Carol talk about AATCLC as well as Nicole. And the AATCLC educates the public about the effects of tobacco on Black American and African immigrant populations, the tobacco industry's predatory marketing tactics, and the need to regulate the sale of menthol and all flavored tobacco products. And the Latino Coordinating Center for a Tobacco-Free California, the acronym is LCC, is a program of the California Health Collaborative in partnership with the University of Southern California. And the mission of LCC is to improve the overall health of Latinos in California by reducing tobacco-related disparities through the adoption and implementation of policies and system changes via the statewide collaboration and community empowerment. Again, both of these resources will be shared in the chat. And then next slide, please. You can also contact your elected officials and ask them to remove these products from your local community. If your community already has a tobacco retail license, you could encourage your local elected officials to make those tobacco retail license ordinances stronger by implementing some of the plugins that Nicole talked about, such as the minimum pack price and eliminating price promotions. And if your jurisdiction doesn't have a tobacco retail license, you could also encourage them to establish a tobacco retail license, but also establishing a comprehensive tobacco retail license. So this is something that as part of any community, you can always contact your elected officials to let them know what is needed to make your community healthier. Next slide. We also want to encourage you to report illegal sales of tobacco and cannabis lookalike products. So to report illegal sales of tobacco products in the city of Los Angeles, and you can go to the next slide, you can contact the Tobacco Enforcement Program at the Office of the LA City Attorney's Office. Now, I do want to point out that this is only for the city of Los Angeles. So there may be other tobacco programs in your jurisdictions that you may be able to contact to report these illegal sales. You can also report it to the Stake Act, to the California Stake Act as well. And you can also report, next slide, you can also report cannabis copycat or lookalike products to the California Attorney General's office. And they have a complaint website. And the complaint website is actually on the screen, but we'll also share that information in the chat as well. And those were all of the resources and just next steps that you can take as an individual or as an organization. We did want to thank you for participating in this webinar with us, and we really hope that we can reconnect with you again so we can work together to reduce cheap little cigars and flavored cigarillos in our communities. And I know that I'm not sure if we wanted to spend some time with Q&A, Nicole. I think I'm not sure if we were going to do that still.
Yes, I got ahead of myself. So sorry about that. But as I'm looking in the Q&A, I see that we have received a couple of questions, and a couple of which we have answered through the Q&A function. So one question that I'll go ahead and post for all of our panelists, and anyone feel free to jump in and provide your thoughts. Someone asks, what advice do you have for those of us working in tobacco control with communities of color as we navigate through the social injustices that our communities face, as well as the continued targeting by the tobacco industry?
Sorry, I was having issues with the mute. So the question, I'm very interested in trying to break silos between tobacco and alcohol. Do you see an opportunity to address smoking, vaping products overall, rather than referring to tobacco and cannabis product policies? I do think that there is a way to address them, but I do think that in order to really get to that part, we really need to make assessments, which is kind of like what we're doing, and trying to really get a sense of where they intersect and how those issues where there's oversight in court enforcement, how that impacts the community. When we started doing some of our preliminary assessments, we were mostly focused in trying to make the difference between illicit dispensaries and those that were licensed. But we started to see real quick that the problem was much greater than we thought, in the sense that because there is different, whether it's at the state or local level, there's different entities that oversee these different industries. There wasn't much conversation between those entities that oversee the industries. So each one was kind of, to a sense, held to their own codes and regulations, but then there were these loopholes where they could intersect. Great example, I don't know if it's still going on, but I know that when WeHo opened up one of their first on-site smoke lounges, they were still bringing out food with the joints, but also we got a word that there was a brewery who had parked one of their beer trucks right outside the dispensary. But the way that they were saying, like, oh, they're just parked there, we're doing our business here. And so we started noticing, and this was a very real conversation that we had with ABC. We asked them if there was, any conversation with PCC when it came to being close to each other as far as like businesses, because that's something that we started to see when we did assessments too. We would see a corner with smoke shops, liquor store, and dispensary in one stop. And there was no actual conversation of being next to each other in a suite per se, like those situations where you have suites or different units to a building. So I think that's where we're starting to see a lot of the loophole. And so in trying to get data, we are hoping that that will definitely drive some of our policy advocacy in addressing those issues. I think that's the best way to do it. Everything has to be data driven. And so as we collect more information, and we're really starting to see how each of these different sectors affect the community, I think we'll get a better sense of how to direct policy recommendations moving forward.
Thank you, Brenda. I really appreciate that. And then I think I'll just chime in a little bit from my experience working in tobacco control with communities of color. I think a lot of it just has to deal with being unapologetic about advocating for the communities that you're representing, right? You know, at the AATCLC, we're definitely unapologetic about advocating for the African American community as it relates to menthol and now little cigars and cigarillos, and finding ways to reduce the impact and the burden of these products in our communities, because the reality is that we have been targeted, right? And so, you know, just really trying to focus and hone in and represent the people that you were trying to protect. I think that is the advice that I would give to anybody who is trying to do this work for communities of color and other marginalized groups. So that's my little 2 cents. And then is there any other contributions from any of our other panelists?
Yeah, I would just to piggyback on what you said, Nicole. I think it's also important to counter the industry. You know, a lot of, well, first of all, I mean, our communities are faced with the ongoing COVID pandemic, an economic crisis, police brutality. I think, you know, we have to start speaking about tobacco as a social justice issue. So, you know, when you talk about access to housing and redlining, you know, that fits in with disparities in retail marketing and why certain communities are more vulnerable to exposure of these products, and then how that leads to disparities in use. So I think if we frame it that way, it is a social justice issue. I mean, the industry has a history of targeting, of racial targeting, and you know, the products may be more novel than cigarettes, but the strategies aren't. And you know, like I stated in my talk, I mean, with these products, with little cigars and cigarillos, they know their demographic. It's youth, it's adolescents, and it's young adults. If you Google Swisher Sweets right now and go onto their website, that's all you're going to see. And a lot of their marketing is rooted in hip hop culture. I have a talk on that. I didn't even talk about that, but so they're exploiting Black culture like crazy. And so if we frame it as what it is, which it is a social justice issue, and then link it within the ongoing issues within our communities, but then also to counter that brand loyalty. Most young adults who consume these products aren't saying, oh, I consume a cigarillo. No, where's my backwood? You know, give me that sweets. I mean, there's the brand loyalty is so deep that our messaging, we have to counter that. And we counter it by, you know, letting them know, did you see what they posted on their Instagram about their solidarity with BLM right after the Floyd murder? I mean, that's a way to get the conversation started and to start crafting messaging, because it's real. It's real, and it is an issue of social justice.
I would also like to add that it's important for us to also make sure we meet the community where they're at, right? And sometimes our community is dealing with other issues, and we can go and partner and join with them on those issues as well, and at the same time educating them, like Dr. Smiley mentioned, on these social injustices and how all of these things are interconnected and connected together, and causing the disparities in our community, right? So definitely taking the time to also learn from your own community and hearing what the community has to say, and also including them in your conversations about the solutions, right? And what are we going to do, in terms of, policies? Well, what does the community want to see, right? So those are some of the things that I think I would like to add and that are important in working with our communities in regards to these issues and social justice.
Thank you to everyone for contributing. We have a couple more questions rolling in. Thank you all for your participation. Let's see if we can address a couple more. We put our end time as 7:30. So if folks are willing to hang on, we'll continue. Another question that we received was, how does your group respond to claims that consumption lounges are needed for social equity?
I think with on-site consumption lounges, I mean, even just from what we're seeing, especially with marijuana being a substance that has psychoactive properties, we've already seen that a lot of the issues that we're seeing with alcohol oftentimes do come from the on-site consumption. The DUIs, the public nuisance, and that's on site, and there's just a sense of over serving that tends to happen as well. And so as we're looking at what on-site consumption lounges could be for cannabis, we also have to see that marijuana impacts coordination, it impacts reaction time. And so what can that look like when somebody's very, stoned, if you will, driving on the road, and how that can impact also, at that level. It's one of those things that it's like, I know that because communities of color have been very impacted by the war of drugs, and particularly with enforcement when it came to cannabis, the industry has done a good job of trying to push this as this will put you in the market per se, but really it's just further exploiting communities of color, in the sense that really it's the major corporations that are really garnering the capital from this industry with little to any room for actual minorities. So it just, looking at it that way, I would say that there's really no real incentive. We're looking at more of what it could cost and how it could impact our communities that have already been impacted, as opposed to, what can be gained, because the cost of it far outweighs what can be gained. And we're even in the numbers that we're seeing as far as revenue, it wasn't as it was promised. And that's something to think about, because at the end of the day, the illicit market is still very much present. So those would be my 2 cents on that. But yeah, I don't know if anybody else wants to add to it.
Well, we do have a couple more questions. I think that was a good one, though. On-site consumption also relates back to hookah and the work that we're doing around that, and how hookah lounges and hookah products have qualified for exemption in a lot of instances. However, studies show that hookah, an hour of smoking hookah is equivalent to smoking 100 cigarettes. So is that really equity when we're thinking about health? giving folks the ability to go to a hookah lounge and smoke hookah, and be exposed to all of that smoke and carcinogen, and even including the workers, who are exposed to all of that secondhand. It's kind of like equity turned on its head if you really think about it. But we have some other questions. We have someone who asked, what high-profile celebrities will support health and denounce smoking, and how do you counter social media influencers? Sadly, Sean King has his profile pic of him smoking. I think that's a great question. Like Dr. Smiley said, we have a lot of folks in hip hop who are, whether on purpose or just on accident, promoting these products for the industry and popularizing them amongst our youth and our community members. And so to me, I think a lot of it has to do with the education of these folks, exposing the social justice issue behind tobacco use, especially as it relates to communities of color, increasing their knowledge that, the general public is really not aware of, so that they can understand that they are part of, this system that is really keeping our health outcomes poor in our communities. I don't know if anybody else wants to add. It might be tough to get in contact with, Young Thug and Sean King and all those folks who are, talking about tobacco products and, unfortunately using them and have a huge platform. However, we can definitely try, and in all of the work that we do on a day-to-day basis, just educating as many folks as we can, and, just domino effect. People will learn and the message will spread, and eventually the outcomes that we're looking for will be achieved. Okay. And so I am looking at the rest of the questions that we have received, and I think we've pretty much addressed them all. But I do encourage everyone to continue to engage with us. We have provided all of our contact email addresses, our websites. Most of us have methods for you to stay engaged with us and reach out to us. So please, let's keep this conversation going. Please stay tuned for future programming on this topic. This is just the beginning. And once again, look out for that follow-up email that we're going to send out that will contain the information from today's program, link to the Google Drive, as well as our other resources. And so apologies for the technical difficulties that we experienced along the way, but thank you for bearing with us. And we hope to continue to work with you all. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our amazing presenters and the folks who helped to make this possible. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Have a good night. Thank you for having us.
And then also, as we sign off, you will be directed to a brief survey. If you can please just take a second to complete that for us. It really does help us to improve our future programming. So thank you again. Take care, all.